Chapter 24, Fungi. This video will cover the characteristics of fungi, classification, ecology, how they're harmful, and finally how they're helpful. This chapter is all about the different types of fungi, which is a word that actually means mushroom, although you'll see that not all fungi make mushrooms. These organisms exhibit an enormous variety, with about 10,000 named species out of the 1.5 million species that probably exist. Fungi are actually more closely related to animals than to plants, which is really neat and kind of a crazy thing to think about, but they have no ability to undergo photosynthesis. They have to digest and ingest their food just like you and me. Fungi can use both sexual and asexual reproductive methods, and they're the decomposers of our world that help to cycle nutrients throughout the environment and make close connections with other organisms. Fungi are eukaryotic in nature, and they often undergo horizontal gene transfer, increasing their genetic variability and probably helping that species number continue to rise. Their cells are easily distinguishable with the amounts of mitochondria, Golgi bodies, and endoplasmic reticulum that they contain. What they don't have is any chlorophyll or chloroplasts. Their pigments are actually contained for coloration and give them protection against UV rays. Some of them use pigments to mark them as toxic. They have very thick cell walls that contain chitin or glycan, both of which are polysaccharides that help to give them structure. Their plasma membranes are a little different too. They contain steroids that make them a bit more stable. Here's another example of a fungus that doesn't look so typical. Fungi can be both unicellular and multicellular. Some can actually even shift between these two different states. Unicellular fungi are usually referred to as yeasts, and that's what you see here. Most fungi, however, are multicellular and have two distinct body forms, one where they're just vegetative and doing their thing, and another when they're ready to reproduce. We refer to that as the reproductive body form. Multicellular walls have special ends called sepa or septa, which separate the intracellular cavities from one another. Fungi can be obligate anaerobe, so some might require oxygen. Others are anaerobic, and others can switch between the two and survive in either situation. Some are even capable of surviving in the driest locations, others are found in underwater habitats, and some can even live quite well under the surface of the skin of humans, which is what you see here, a fungus that can cause a chronic subcutaneous infection. Fungi can grow quite large, and for that they need an influx of nutrients. They are heterotrophic in nature and obtain their materials and nutrients from external digestion. Most are saprobes and help to continue the nitrogen, carbon, and phosphorus cycles on our planet. Some can even be parasitic, like the one that we saw on the last slide. Fungi can use special hyphae called historia to infiltrate the organisms that they're infecting. Fungal hyphae look like arms or leaves, and you can see them here. They might be sepiated, so they have the walls in between, or they might not, and there might just be many nuclei present within a single hyphae. Down on the bottom, you can see a bright-filled micrograph in which you can see little septa separating some of the hyphae. Reproduction in fungi can be sexual or asexual. Perfect fungi can perform both types of reproduction, while imperfect fungi can only perform asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction can lead to the release of trillions of spores in one fell swoop, and the spores are lighter than anything released by plants or animals, so they can travel further. Asexual reproduction includes fragmentation, budding, and the production of spores. Fragments of hyphae can grow to form entirely new colonies. Somatic cells in yeast regularly bud off from their parent cells to form whole new yeast structures. In many fungal species, a specialized body called a sporangia can produce spores via mitosis. There are a variety of sexually produced spores too. Here's what those sporangium look like at the end of the hyphae. There are potentially hundreds of spores in each one of those little tips. Most fungi can undergo both types of reproduction. Sexual reproduction tends to occur as a response to dangerous environmental conditions, and it has 3 stages. In plasmogamy, the haploid cells from 2 different mycela fuse to form a heterokaryotic cell that contains at least 2 different nuclei. The different nuclei fuse to form one large zygote. Zygote grows via meiosis and releases spores. Each spore can grow into its own mycelium, which can then undergo asexual reproduction or enter back into sexual reproduction. When we classify fungi, or fungi, depending on who you ask, there are 5 major phyla and a 6th phyla that seems to act as a catch-all. We're going to run down this list if you want to pause the video and take a second to write down these names. Chytrids are simple, primitive, and approximately 500 million years old. They have both chitin and cellulose in their cell walls. Most are unicellular, a few are multicellular. They produce gametes, while others produce flagellated zoospores. They usually live in aquatic environments and can occasionally be considered parasitic. The zygomycetes are the second major phyla, and they're largely saprobes. Some are insect parasites that can devastate entire populations. Others play important commercial roles. They might be used in secondary steps in the creation of steroids, for example. Their life cycle is seen here. It follows the basic steps of the life cycle we've already looked at. Bread molds are a really common example of zygomycota, so I'm sure you've probably seen one of these before. The ascomycota, or sac fungi, include a majority of fungus. They are characterized by the formation of ascus, which is a sac-like structure that contains their haploid ascospores. Many ascomycetes are of commercial importance. Some play a beneficial role, like the yeast that are used in baking, brewing, and wine fermentation, and the truffles and morels, which we love to eat. Asexual reproduction is really common in ascomycota, but it's important to note that they can undergo sexual reproduction in which 2 different mating strains are formed. Sexual reproduction in this phyla starts with the development of a special hyphae from either one or both of the different types of mating strains. The male strain produces something called an antheridium, while the female strain produces an ascogonium. At fertilization, the antheridium and ascogonium combined in plasmogamy without any nuclear fusion. Special ascogenous hyphae arise in which the different pairs of nuclei migrate. In each ascus, 2 or more haploid ascospores fuse their nuclei in charigamy. During sexual reproduction, thousands of asci fill a fruiting body that we call an ascocarp. The diploid nucleus gives rise to haploid nuclei via meiosis. The ascospores are then released, they germinate and form hyphae that are disseminated into the environment and grow as brand new mycelia. The 4th group, the Basidiomycota, are also called club fungi. The mental image that you get when you hear fungus is most likely a Basidiomycota. They have club-shaped fruiting bodies that we refer to as basidia. Their reproductive bodies are commonly seen in fields after heavy rainstorms and are sometimes referred to as gill fungi. These are all of the mushrooms in Mario Brothers. They too undergo the alternation of generations. You can see their life cycle here. It's very similar to that of the zygomycota. Asexual Asomycota and Basidiomycota are considered their own phylum. They're largely found on land and tend to be called molds. Reproduction of the fungi in this group is strictly asexual and occurs mostly by the production of asexual kinidiophores. Some hyphae can recombine and form heterokaryotic hyphae. Genetic recombination is actually known to take place between the different nuclei to increase genetic variation. They're missing out on that because of the solely asexual reproduction. They too are commercially important and are often used to ripen cheeses. The mold that makes penicillin comes from this group. The Glomerulomycota is a newly established phylum which comprises about 230 species that all live in close relationship to the roots of trees. Fossil records indicate that trees and their root symbionts share a very long history. Glomerulomycetes do not reproduce sexually and cannot survive without the presence of the roots of trees. Fungi balance ecosystems and colonize most habitats on Earth. Their habitats are primarily associated with cool and humid locations, although some do great in the desert and then take over the body when breathed into the lungs. Think valley fever. Others are Some fungi are decomposers and recyclers, and some make their stand in biology thanks to their mutualistic relationships. Fungi are decomposers that continue the nitrogen, carbon, and phosphorus movement in the environment. They proceed through their digestion via external action of exoenzymes. Once their food has been digested, they proceed with ingestion through their cell walls and pick up any nutrients that they might be lacking. Some types of fungi grow up the sides of trees and digest the trunk and the branches as they go. This can happen to both dead and live trees. When the trees are alive, obviously it's quite the problem, and they are considered serious pathogens. Fungi can have mutualistic relationships with plants that aren't harmful. In fact, it's thought that 80 to 90% of plants have some sort of relationship with a fungi. They exchange water and nutrients with one another. There are different types of mycorrhiza. Ectomycorrhiza wrap around the root and grow between the cells of the roots, while a second type of mycorrhiza actually enter into the root cells themselves to interact with each cell on its own level. Not all interactions are positive ones, though. Fungi can cause infections like those seen here. Some of the infections affect the way that an individual grows overall. The fungus in A causes pine trees to only produce very ineffectual, small, branched rootlets, and those trees aren't capable of growing very tall. Another important ecological partnership with fungi are lichens. Lichens are actually a single plant that comes from a fungi and algal symbiotic event. Lichens are colorful and textured and can live in unhostile environments. They have special reproductive structures called ceridia that can survive in harsh conditions. Lichens are capable of breaking down rocks and turning them into soil. The return of the lichens to places that might have been decimated by, say, a volcanic eruption is usually the first sign that that plot of land is going to heal. This cross-section of a lichen thallus shows the upper cortex of the fungal hyphae in A, which provides the whole plant with protection. In B, you can see the algal zone, where photosynthesis is actually occurring. This feeds the whole plant. C is the medulla of the fungal hyphae, and D is the lower cortex, which also provides protection. In some instances, lichens have E, the rhizines, that anchor the thallus to the substrate. This allows them to grow on those rocks that I mentioned. Lichens are extremely sensitive to air pollution, especially abnormal levels of nitrogen and sulfur. For this reason, the U.S. Forest Service and the National Park Service use them to measure air quality based purely on the abundance and health of the lichens in a given area. They help to fulfill many ecological roles. Caribou and reindeer, for example, love munching on lichens, and they provide cover for small invertebrates that can hide down in their mycelium. There are some fungal and animal mutualistic relationships that are kind of neat to study. The leaf-cutting ants of Central and South America actually have learned to farm fungi. They cut discs of leaves from plants and then pile them up in these really big gardens. And the fungi are actually cultivated in these gardens. They digest the cellulose in the leaves, which isn't any good for the ants because they can't break them down. Once smaller sugar molecules are produced and consumed by the fungi then become meals for the ants. The insects regularly patrol their garden and actually remove competing bits of fungi. Both the ants and the fungi benefit from this association. The fungus receives a steady supply of leaves to eat from and freedom from any potential competition, while the ants feed on the fungus that they cultivate. Fungus can be quite dangerous. Some pathogens include the green molds that grow on grapefruits, the powdery molds that are found on flowers, stem rusts that occur on different cereals, and the gray rot that can grow on grapes. A lot of scientists spend a lot of time, energy, and money trying to determine the best ways to control these fungal infections as they damage the food source for both animals and humans. Other fungal infections are damaging to humans. In A, you can see ringworm. In B, you can see a fungus that actually can infect your scalp. And then in C, you can see a fungus that's an ascomycete that infects the airways of humans and causes symptoms that are really similar to the flu. Sometimes there's a whole cycle of individuals that are damaging one another. There's an insect called an emerald ash borer that likes to eat ash trees. But that insect can actually have a parasitized fungus growing within it. and that fungus looks like a white body on the insect itself. The fungus can be passed into the tree by the dangerous insect, harming everyone in the whole circle, except for the fungus, of course. It's important to note that not all fungi are bad. The morel mushroom is an ascomycete that is very much appreciated for its delicate taste. Truffles are really popular too. On that note, we end chapter 24 on fungi. Make sure you read the chapter, take notes in your own words, do practice problems, and complete the homework assignment that's been assigned.